Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Shoot the Moon podcast brought to you by Revenue Rocket. For those of you who may be new, Revenue Rocket is the world's premier M&A advisor and growth strategy advisor for tech-enabled services worldwide. I'm with my partner in crime, Ryan Barnett. Our fearless leader, Mike, is out again today, but looks forward to getting back next week. Ryan, how are you doing?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing great. And thank you so much for joining here today. We are really focused on issues that are fairly down the pipe in mergers and acquisition work for IT services companies. So if you're an MSP or a CSP or you're application developer and someone in the tech services space and you're trying to understand what this market is like, the Shoot the Moon podcast is for you. Uh, Today, we are talking about something a little bit long tail, but it is something important, which is non-compete and non-solicitation clauses that you might see within all sorts of legal agreements in the M&A process. We can see them as early as letters of intent. We've seen them even almost non-disclosure agreements. I think can have some clauses related to that. But Matt, help me understand and just get me going. What is the purpose of a non-compete clause in any kind of M&A deal?
Yeah, Ryan, a great question for sure. And non-competes, non-solicitation is absolutely a critical part of the overall legal agreements between, buyers and sellers. Obviously from a buyer perspective, the buyer is trying to protect their interest as well as protect their business. So the interest in buying a new business and their existing business, and ensuring that there is adequate coverage that a seller is not going to use his knowledge, his past relationships to compete in the like services that the buyer is interested in. So it sort of sets the framework, if you will, that the buyer has adequate protection related to customers, to employees, to contracts, and those three are, I think, the majority of protection. Important, again, that there's things that are typically market, right? And then there's things that are not market, meaning, they're standard versus at times, people try to sort of land grab, if you will, or grab too much protection through the use of their non-compete and non-solicitation agreements.
And that leads, Matt, it's a great introduction. And I think that leads me straight to my next question. If you think about legal agreements, there's typically going to be, I try to think of them in points of negotiation. And if you think about a non-compete, there's going to be a duration component, and there's likely going to be some regionality, or there's going to be some focused areas. Matt, can you help me understand kind of, what might be, as you mentioned, market standard for some of the durations that you would see?
Yeah. Yeah, I think an important distinction here to sort of introduce into the conversation is whether a seller is selling out or selling into the business, and we use that term a lot. Selling out is you're selling the business, you've got as short a transition as possible, and then you are on to a different chapter altogether. Selling is you're going to be a part of the business moving forward, and potentially you are going to be a shareholder in the business. And the reason that I bring that up is that in the context of selling out, you can see non-compete, non-solicitation agreements as short as 1 year. or you could see them as long as 5 years. Now, I think that that bell curve or that baseline would have it in the 3 year time frame, but again, somewhere between 1 and 5 years. If you are selling into the business, and in particular, if you are becoming a shareholder, your shareholder agreement will also have a non-compete and non-solicitation clause. And oftentimes you will see that shareholder aspect be on the longer end. 5 years is oftentimes very typical for that non-compete, non-solicitation as part of the shareholder agreement.
Great guidance. And if I think about scope here as well, it seems like a non-compete, if I was to go, if I'm running a managed service provider today and I wanted to go open a karate studio, that would probably be fine. If I wanted to go and open something that is still in the tech world, let's say an AI automation practice, um, do non-competes typically get into the what you can or cannot compete in, or is there definitions around uh, that area?
Well, they certainly should, Brian. And again, going to some people trying to be too broad with non-competes and non-solicitations. Oftentimes you would see in those situations where they aren't specified. Areas of specificity can be the services offered. It can be the technology, could be technology channel relationship related. It could be geographically based. And so there's a number of different areas in which it is important and applicable to specify within the agreement. For example, say that using your example of a managed service provider, well, it would be applicable to specify that CSP related or cloud sales or procurement of hardware and the such, would be applicable as an aspect of the non-compete because those are things that are being done by that company today. Now, um, say a firm is interested in, or a seller is interested in staying in technology, and they've got some experience in an aspect of system integration. Say it's ERP integration services that are typically directed towards a different customer set, right? A more of an enterprise or upper middle market customer set. And so the service line is different, the technology is different, and the customer set is different. Well, that's where specificity matters because that would be non-competitive in nature, and the non-compete shouldn't with constrain a seller from being in the technology market, but it's different.
I think that's some of the great nuances that I think you're tackling are fantastic here. The breadth and the depth of the non-compete has to be agreed to. And I should note, by the way, we are not lawyers. We're not pretending to be lawyers. These are just terms that we're going to see throughout agreements. And it's a practical question that we get all the time. People are looking at if I sell my company today and I still need to make an earning somehow, how am I going to be able to do that? And that somewhat gets to just one of the other questions that I have, which is, are non-competes just really enforceable? There's some states, California, Texas, Minnesota, that treat them differently than others. So in general, how enforceable does a non-compete look, and does what kind of recourses does a buyer have in the case that there could be a competitive offering going forward?
Yeah, certainly, and this is where we'll, sort of tread lightly to your point. We aren't lawyers, and 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 the enforceability that is written into the non-compete and non-solicitation clauses, can be specific and drawn out as well. Certainly any party can bring a matter forward to the courts. They can, there's injunctions that can be made if there is a clear line where um, a party can identify harm. Then the aspect of harm that is generated and can be, clearly stipulated, typically those agreements will call out that those things should have penalties and or recourse or the like. Now, how and where, those are the matters that are important to work with your lawyer on, to make sure that there's, again, adequate and fair coverage, but not too broad, and enforceability and or penalties are understood, and as well specified as to what is right applicable for some level of enforcement or payment, and what aspects are not.
Yeah, that's it. All great points. And um, again, work with your lawyer on these specifically, but understand there's going to be constraints here within any agreement that you look at. And Matt, part of this, you've talked non-compete and non-solicitation in the same breath, and most time when we have this topic, they are very much hand in hand. What is the nuance there? What is the difference between a non-compete and a non-solicitation clause?
Yeah, sure. I typically, the aspect of non-competition is related to customers, right? And so, real simply, non-compete, don't compete for customers, right? Um, and there's other aspects to it, but that's obviously the most important. And non-solicitation is don't come after employees, right? So, and both are extremely important. In our tech-enabled services space, people are like gold, right? They are people-based businesses. Talent is incredibly important, and so the ability for a buyer to protect themselves against a seller poaching people is absolutely critical. And then, obviously, everybody thinks about the aspects of don't go after customers.
Yeah. So if I hear this, a non-compete kind of don't compete with as a business as a whole. The non-solicit, don't you can't literally solicit employees, and don't poach employees, don't poach customers. So they're similar, but buyers are going to treat them a little bit differently. They're going to have independent clauses in your agreements that go after that.
Yeah,
Um,
and Ryan, I mean, honestly, we have seen this quite a bit where, say maybe it wasn't the founder or the CEO of the business, but there are other shareholders in the business, and those shareholders had to execute their own non-competes and non-solicitation agreements as past shareholders of the business. But their entire career is in the space, and they wanted to continue forward in the space. And we have seen a number of times where those shareholders went after their network. And and so it is a real deal. And so, that brings in another layer when there's a shareholder group, and all aren't equal. And, maybe the main shareholder is, fine and dandy because they were moving on, but other shareholders weren't. And so, it sort of needs to be thought of in the context of everyone who those non-competes and non-solicitations are applicable for.
Right, right. That's really a great point. Um, and that part of this is these seem boilerplate. Like, I mean, everyone we've seen has been fairly similar. We oftentimes get into the non-disclosure agreements. We can even see an element of this, especially with private equity firms who have many different subsidiaries that they're dealing with. Is there any advice that you can give to a seller where they're dealing with a complicated entity like a private equity group that may have a non that might completely strike a non-solicitation or non-compete clause?
Ryan, we have seen that. And oftentimes you will see that earlier on in the assessment of an opportunity. As you talked about, some NDAs have aspects of non-compete, non-solicitation included in the non-disclosure agreement. And rightly so, because you're not talking about a definitive agreement, but you are starting to share information, and a buyer may have their hands on the employee list and or the customer list, and obviously the seller wants a level of protection to know that I'm interested in exploring the opportunity, but you can't use the information that I'm giving to you as a competitive advantage for the buyer. And so you do see groups try to strike at times, and I think fair to again go back to what is market. What is the appropriate use of the non-compete and non-solicitation agreements at the certain times throughout a potential transaction versus the appropriateness of them in sort of the final agreements that are in place.
Right. Okay. Matt, recently we've come across deals in which there's a consideration, a cash consideration for a non-compete. Can you explain to the audience why a consideration might be part of an LOI or a deal structure for that non-compete?
Well, there can be a couple of different reasons. One may be that it's difficult to clearly delineate, right, the specificity of a non-compete or a non-solicitation. For it could be an example could be in the world of artificial intelligence. Well, artificial intelligence is changing, right? Well, it's changing on a daily, weekly, basis. And so a buyer may not be able to specify appropriately the areas that are applicable within a non-compete, yet they know that they want the applicable coverage. And so they may write a broader than market coverage, right? A broader than market non-compete and or non-solicitation. Well, it's not, it's difficult for that seller in that case to accept a broad agreement, but for monetary consideration, they may do so. Much more often, the monetary considerations are related to non-competes and non-solicitations, within an employment agreement. And that may be applicable as part of this conversation as well, right? Where a seller is joining the new firm as an employee, maybe not as a shareholder, but just as an employee, and they've got to sign a more restrictive non-compete than what was in the transaction documents. Well, in that case, if they're signing a more restrictive non-compete, applicable to ask for some level of monetary financial compensation related to that.
Yeah, no, that helps. Matt, is there any mistake that you see sellers make when reviewing clauses around non-competes?
I think sometimes we see sellers who are like, I'll sign anything, right? Because I'm not going to be in the business anymore. And I'm retiring, or I'm going and starting that taekwondo karate studio or the like. And so they may sign too broad and too restrictive and or too long of a non-compete because at that point in time, they didn't have any interest in the space or in the business anymore. Well, that can change, right? And so I think that, sort of the guidance is just do what is market, work with your lawyer as to what is applicable, even if you don't feel as though there's going to be any need for it, because simply you don't know the opportunities that could come forward in that time frame of the non-compete, non-solicitation that you're signing.
Yeah, and I think founders get antsy. And so it's sometimes they just want to get back to work, and oftentimes that's back to work in an area that they feel comfortable with. And to that, Matt, kind of the last question I got for you here is, what advice can you give to someone who is on a 2-year non-compete?
Follow the non-compete. Don't break it. It can be a slippery slope, right? Where you say, well, yeah, that was a past customer, and but this isn't really the same service, and you can sort of talk yourself into, or they're not really going to care, or this guy likes me more than he likes them, or whatever it may be. You can talk yourself into justification, and the fact of the matter is there rarely is a justification that where you are crossing the line. um, so understand it, live with it, and don't get too close to that line.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say go play more golf.
Well, that's sometimes, but and it is we are coming up on June in Minnesota, Ryan. So, go play more golf is in our sight lines as opposed to 3 months ago.
No, I appreciate the being on this topic here today. It's something that we do get questions about these non-competes. Kind of take a look, make sure that you're going past the boilerplate, understand what you're signing. If you're a seller, work to reduce the number of years that are on that. If you're a buyer, you're going to want to increase the number of years. They're going to be in every contract you deal with. So it's going to be something, and it needs to be attention. The enforceability is going to vary greatly, and things like considerations, a cash consideration can probably help enforcement a bit. At the very least, just to keep someone away, to understand that there's a section of money that was dedicated in a enterprise value towards consideration for non-compete. And so keep in mind, you're going to work through them. The goal is not to be punitive anyway to either buyers or sellers, and it's a negotiation point, and one that needs to really be discussed. Matt, I'll turn it over to you. That's again a great topic. Appreciate any closing thoughts, and I'll let you close it out.
Sounds good, Ryan. Thank you. Great topic, an important one. There is some nuance to it for sure. Work with your lawyer. It's a plug that we've made a number of times. A good, experienced mergers and acquisitions lawyer is really important. They're going to help you understand what market is and what isn't. Be open about your situation and the considerations for the future. Certainly, a non-compete, non-solicitation should not be a deal breaker, right? If it is getting to the point where it is breaking a deal, then I think important to step back and think about the deal itself and the opportunity itself, because this one should not be a make it or break it. So great subject. We look forward to getting Mike back here next week. And a hearken to him with that, we'll tie a ribbon on it. Hope you enjoyed it. Please come back next week, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.